And we're live. This is Andrew with Constitutional Roundtable, and we're on episode 9. We will be joined by Warhamster here shortly, as well as Doug. Just want to say thank you for watching now or later. We'll be talking about some interesting topics today, and we will definitely be piquing the interest of many people about corruption, going against the Constitution, so on and so forth. And we will be getting rolling here briefly once they get in. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments and we'll try to get to them as soon as possible. If you could, please subscribe and like as well. That definitely helps us be able to get people in what we're doing here. And there's Doug. How you doing, Doug?
I am fine. Good to see you. I don't know if Brady was able to tell you, I'm on my way back from Los Angeles County, and I gave myself a little over 2 hours, and let's just say it took more.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're here, and let me go ahead and introduce our panel. As usual, we have Mr. Constitution Douglas V. Gibbs. He is our constitutional scholar, and also he is very witty. And then we also have Warhamster, who is also can make you chuckle, and also he is, I would say it's fair to say that you're the researcher of the panel, if I may say that.
We both research, but he's damn good at it.
Yeah. I don't think I could hear you, Warhamster. Do you have any audio on him, Doug?
I'm not hearing him, no.
No. Well, we'll get that sorted out here shortly. We got one person already watching, which is awesome. All right, so...
and the reason why I was parked rather than driving is I was actually sending out the email. I didn't get the chance because I thought I'd be home by now. And the Warhamster says, hey, just send out an email. I better do it with my phone.
Well, I mean, now better than never. I mean, that's for sure. So right now, we're in an undisclosed location. So I thought our vacation was next week. It's actually this week. So that's why the background's looking a little different, but that's all right. Looks like Warhamster left. But anyway, so how's your day? How's your week, Doug? Oh, looks like I lost you too, Doug.
So Warhamster disappeared, needs to come back, right?
Say that again. You kind of cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I was on mute because I didn't want you to hear the background noise. But then my question is, do you hear background noise?
Not really. I mean, a little bit, but not much. I think it's fine.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll leave my mic on.
There we go. Plus, that gives a more raw and authentic feel to it. So, but anyway, while we're waiting for Warhamster, Doug, I have a question for you. And It's not really a question for me, but a question for someone who'll be watching this with the same question. So I had a coworker this week that he was talking about how the Supreme Court ruled the gun laws in New York unconstitutional. And I was like, yeah, that's good, but I mean, really, that's up to the states. Or that's up to New York. That's not a federal matter. And he goes,
you're talking about the Bruin case, I take it.
Maybe. I'm not 100%.
One where they were targeting the law, their concealed carry rules.
Oh, that must have been it then.
Hey guys, how's my volume now? The headset doesn't appear to be working, so I'm going off AirPods. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay,
I asked Doug a question, so we'll do that and then we'll continue on. And the question was, which Warhamster you could chime in as well. But anyway, so I was like, really, the states can actually make laws in regards to our rights. I mean, it's not technically unconstitutional.
Well, Andrew, let's break it down here with the question. The question, Warhamster, is over. The Supreme Court making decisions regarding the Second Amendment, and let's break it down just a little bit before we get too deep into it. So, first of all, the Second Amendment is regarding your right to keep and bear arms. So regardless of law, regardless of papers, you have that right. Now, the question is, what is the legal position, or what is the legal allowances when it comes to the federal government, when it comes to states, when it comes to your local government, when it comes to your decisions, and so on and so forth. And this writing of the Second Amendment was, as a part of the Bill of Rights, a concern that the federal government might interfere with our rights because it was designed for external issues. Our rights is an internal issue within our states. It's our personal issues. We can go to Federalist Paper number 45 by James Madison, and he explains that the powers given to the federal government have to do with external issues and issues that have to do with the union, basically, and the states, the powers they're going to retain or reserve are the ones that are going to be directly related to the internal order and improvement of the state and the lives, liberties, and properties of the people. In other words, our rights. So from a constitutional point of view, from a legal point of view, and let's not get this mixed up with our natural right here, the Second Amendment does not apply to the states, it applies to the federal government. And it says shall not be infringed. Now, this is a tough concept for people to kind of get through their head because of what we believe, what we taught. You know, we've been taught, and we've been convinced that, you know, if anything's going to be protected and saved and done and built, it's got to be the federal government. And we have to get out of that mindset. And so the federal government, from a technical standpoint, if it says shall not be infringed, that means that no law can be made regarding guns whatsoever. And if no law can be made regarding guns, then no action by the federal government can be taken regarding guns. So from a constitutional standpoint, the Supreme Court or any federal court had no business taking the Bruen case or any other gun rights case. Now, that said, the conclusion they came to about New York's concealed carry law was, for the most part, accurate. You can't, you know, determine whether or not someone has the right to concealed carry because of whether or not they have a need or they can profess a need. Now, that said, though, if you have a right to bear arms, then there really should be no permit laws by the states. However, that said, also, if a state wants to have a law that says, okay, a guy that's got, you know, such and such felony against him, or they're not quite this age yet, or whatever other, you know, situation they want a state can technically, legally, from a constitutional standpoint, make that law. Now, when they do that and they violate our right, or if they go too far and violate our right, one of the problems with Americans is that the first thing we want to do is we'll go, oh gosh, someone's got to fix it. Hey, federal government, hey, federal courts, come on, punish the state. And that's not the right answer. We don't want them involved in our stuff. Well, then, gosh, Doug, who's supposed to defend our rights against these states? Brady, do you have an answer?
The states are supposed to check the federal government. The people are supposed to check the states.
The people. Oh, darn it. It's up to us. What a concept.
Well,
Yeah.
here's something interesting, Doug. Let me just interject this real quick.
Okay.
I looked through the New York Constitution, and it actually does not have a Second Amendment.
They do have some language regarding guns, but it's not as well written as most states.
And
Andrew,
then here's
you want to do, Andrew, real quick, you want to go look for the original New York Constitution, which did have Second Amendment language. They revised the Constitution at least twice. They read differently. So I've got them both bookmarked, and they are vastly different.
You know, I did notice that. Go ahead.
Yeah, this modern version is a bit of a travesty. Their original one would have been fine in any of the states. It was actually a pretty well-written Constitution.
Are provisions legal?
Provisions.
I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not technically an amendment. It's just they revised it, I guess.
Yeah, well, there's language. It depends on the state constitution. State constitutions, they revise the language through amendment, and rather on some of them. Then you got ones like California where they just stack everything, and you wind up with a novel that's thicker than War and Peace. But
yeah, New York just they ratified a whole new constitution. They just rewrote the whole thing, tossed out the old one, brought in the new.
Right.
Okay. Now, Doug, here's the second thing I wanted to. It's tied in with what you already kind of hit, but his argument to me is that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, applies to the federal, state, and local governments. And he told me, he's like, the Bill of Rights is our rights. I mean, no one could do anything about it. And
yeah, that's incorporation. It's a debate that's been going on for 240 years.
I'm going to mute myself so that Brady can grab this one.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks, Doug. Since I've been reading a bunch on this one, no, incorporation's been a major topic of debate, and they basically, it's stated very clearly in the Federalist Papers and during the ratifying conventions that basically the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. And if you think about it from the state standpoint, what were they doing in Philadelphia? These are 13 sovereign nations. They're creating a central government, or general government, as they would have called it, which didn't exist under the Articles of Confederation. And they were very worried about giving this new entity too much power. They knew what the nature of a state is to grow outside its its intended purposes. So they were very crystal clear that it had limited enumerated powers and nothing more, which is explained very clearly in the 9th and 10th Amendments, that basically anything that was not enumerated towards the federal government was reserved. Not reserved. What's my word? Almost like reserved, left to the states. Long story short, where this really came into play with incorporation was after the 14th Amendment. And that's been so badly misinterpreted by the Supreme Court, it basically has given the federal government a blank check to do anything they want to the states. So it's a really important question. It's been debated for a long time. It's very crystal clear what the original intent was that the Bill of Rights applied only to the federal government and not to the states. But that has been twisted and warped over the last 200 plus years, mostly by non-elected judges. And while I'm on that topic, you're going back to the Second Amendment. Should the Supreme Court be weighing in on a New York State gun law? What I tell people is, you really don't want the federal courts getting involved in your local gun laws, because what's going to happen if sometime in the future, you get a 6-3 majority liberal court? They can go out there and they can mess with your state gun laws. Who's going to stop them? Yeah. You don't want them messing with your state business. But it is. We could go for hours on incorporation. It's one of the most important constitutional debates there is, and it's fundamental to the form of government we should have versus the one we do have.
Yeah. And to me, my standpoint was the Supreme Court should just be like, we can't talk about this. It goes back to the state, and they're going to have to figure it out. So
yeah, and also, Andrew, we have to understand something, and let's go back kind of to the beginning. Okay, so yeah, he's right. Our rights belong to us, but the people who wrote the Bill of Rights were we the people of the states, and the delegates of the states, and the representative of the states from Congress, and the ones who approved it were delegates from the states. So they weren't worried about themselves taking away their guns. They were worried about this new government. So if you read about the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, you'll realize that there is a preamble that goes along with them. Just like there's a preamble to the Constitution, there's a preamble to the Bill of Rights. And if you read that preamble, it explains to you that the reason for the Bill of Rights is to prevent its misconstruction or abuse of its powers. The misconstruction or abuse of its powers, the it is the federal government. That's what it was originally intended. And even the most leftist historian will tell you that originally the Bill of Rights only applied to the federal government. Their argument, to get back to Brady's point, which he and I have done a lot of research about this, is 14th Amendment. It's being used as an excuse to incorporate the Bill of Rights to the states. And of course, as Brady alluded to, and I'll probably repeat a little bit of this, first of all, we know that they didn't mean for the Bill of Rights be applied to the states because, number one, if you read the congressional record during the vote, they voted against that. It was a narrow vote, but they did. Number two, they never legislatively applied the Bill of Rights to the states. They waited until the courts began to do it. So, and if it had been a part of the 14th Amendment, it is the reason that that the legislature, the Congress, would have done it. Lastly, one of the, and this once again, I know I'm echoing Warhamster here, is if the Second Amendment applied to federal government, state government, county government, city government, then why would the states and their state constitutions bother to have gun language? And so that, once again, it stands to reason that if they are going to take that action, that means that even at that point, the Bill of Rights didn't apply to the states. Now, we have to really be careful here because we got to be careful getting, and I said this earlier when it came to your first question, we have to be careful not to think that the federal government here is supposed to be the savior of everything. We don't want them being the savior. It's not a Pandora's box we want to open. An example I use in my classes is McDonald v. Chicago. Chicago had banned the sale of or possession of handguns, and McDonald sued and went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, hey, you can't do that. You're violating the Second Amendment. And Clarence Thomas, of whom I appreciate and admire, even applied the Second Amendment to the city on this. And I got all kinds of phone calls and emails and so on and so forth. Hey, Doug, man, what a win for gun rights. And my response was, don't be so sure. Do you really want a federal court dictating to your local government what it can or can't do with your gun rights? And at what point, after you give them that power, do they say, oh, by the way, it's no longer an individual
Sounds like Atari.
Doug, you're cutting out pretty good.
Doug, you're cutting out.
Police force or the army or something in order to be armed. At what point does that happen? So we have to be very careful allowing the federal government involved in our business. It wasn't created to be involved. The state can stomp all over our gun rights or our rights in general. But the local government is going to be closer to us, should be better under our control. And so we should be line. At what point do they go too far? Where is it written that what line the state's not allowed to cross? It's not written somewhere. As citizens, we're supposed to know. We're supposed to apply that. So that's my take on it, or my additional what I have to say on it.
Yeah, if you don't like your state's gun laws, you have two choices: work to change them or move. It's really that simple.
Yeah, by the way, I just wanted to say I've got a real quick. I just want to tell you, I see something you don't see very often. I've got a vehicle in front of me. And he's got the Roman numeral 3 in his window. You know what that means? Don't say it out loud because it might be canceled. But and then it says, "Are you
Maybe
American or a Democrat?" I'm sorry.
Or he's FBI.
He's in front of me, and he's got the stars around the Roman numeral 3 with 1776 below it. You know what that means? 3.
Yeah.
Finish a sentence in your head.
Yeah. No, I got you. Yeah.
But anyway, I just was happy to see that. He's got a grunt style shirt on, so I just passed him. So good guy. All right, continue, please. By the way, I'm probably about 10 minutes from getting to my front door, maybe 15.
Right.
It's taking longer than I thought it would. Go ahead.
All right. What were you gonna say?
Final point on the Second Amendment is you got to remember that that amendment was created for one specific purpose, and that was so that the states could always have an armed militia prepared in case to defend themselves against a tyrannical central government. They weren't worried about other states invading. They weren't worried about them invading themselves. It was specifically to defend against a tyrannical central government. And they, hunting and self-defense, those are all nice little, secondary considerations, but that was it. And
well, let me add something to that, Brady. You said that it's for one reason. Really, it's for two reasons. And I really hadn't talked about the second reason a lot until the last year or so. The second one is to carry out any domestic federal law, to execute any domestic federal law. Federal government's not supposed to have agencies that execute local, domestic, federal law. That's supposed to be through the militias, which is another way of also keeping them in check, keeping the federal government from becoming tyrannical.
So please apply that to the Border Patrol. Should the states not be patrolling their own border then?
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
well,
just
a little bit of both.
I would say technically no, just because the border is one of the few things that the federal government actually has control over, which they're not doing.
Well, they have the authority to make law. They have the authority to make immigration law, but at what point is the Border Patrol going beyond, or ICE going beyond constitutional authority? In other words, because in Article 1, Section 8, this is a good question by Brady, because in Article 1, Section 8, if you go there and it says that Congress has the authority to call forth the militia, and what it says after that is to execute the laws of the Union. So that would mean then that the Border Patrol should be the militia.
Okay.
So it's a very good question, and I would say that in a sense, also immigration is one of the few authorities that is truly concurrent. And what I mean by concurrent is both the federal government and the state government have authority over it, but their authorities are different based on the situation. So the federal government's going to have the authority to keep people from crossing. They're going to have the authority to deport. But what happens once the person's inside the state? That is the state's authority now. Now they have the authority to say, whoa, this person's not supposed to be in my state. I'm going to detain them. I'm going to get them to the militia who is working for the federal government so that they can deport them. That's how it's supposed to function.
All right. Well, that was a fantastic beginning of the show, I'd have to definitely say. Now we're going into part 2.
Okay.
So, Doug, I have a couple questions for you. Is it unconstitutional for the federal government to be, without the consent of the individuals, to be injecting them with plutonium?
If we're talking about the jab,
nope.
Or so where's the plutonium aspect of this coming from?
So he's talking about it. He's talking about a specific experiment that we actually did on our own citizens. Go get them, Andrew.
Oh, really?
So in the 1940s.
Oh, you know what? I've come across this. Yes. I know what you're talking about. Well, there's no authority for them to inject you with anything.
Right.
First of all.
Now, here's another question: does the federal government have the authority to abduct citizens?
Oh man, you're going to some deep little bullshit. All right, let's get real simple here. Enumeration doctrine. If it's not specifically enumerated, first of all, they don't have the authority. So abduction, if you want to use that word, or any type of injection is not authorized, first of all. That said, you do also have a right not to have habeas corpus suspended when it comes to the federal government. What that means is if you are detained by the federal government for any reason, you are required to be given your due process, your day in court. And part of that is a speedy and public trial with a jury. So to answer your question in the context that it's given, no, they don't have the authority to abduct, but if they do arrest or detain for a reason they believe to be perfectly legal, that detainment must be resolved quickly through due process.
Okay. Brady, what do you
I
got
would
to
say that, well, you know, when you ask the idea about injecting plutonium, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Nuremberg Code. It's a gross violation of the Nuremberg Code, and
which is a treaty that we abide by. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been internationally settled law for up until 2020. Nobody had, but I guess maybe we had violated it, but it was considered to be pretty much international law. And you know, generally speaking, our government's not supposed to be violating international law on our citizens. It's a human rights violation.
So I kind of alluded to what tonight's going to be about last week. Brady helped me with a little bit of it. And actually, whenever you sent me one of the Oppenheimer documents, from what I read, it did not mention a certain thing about him that's in there. He actually gave the approval to have all those injections performed on the citizens back in the 40s.
Lovely.
Yeah. Do you have a name of a program that it was under? Because I remember reading about this. Now, once you started to kind of go into a little explanation, it hit me, but I can't remember. There's a program name for it.
Well,
I don't know it, but Oppenheimer was director of Los Alamos, correct? That's where this
yes,
going
he
on?
was. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I remember right, someone could correct me on this, but I believe it was even during the Manhattan Project. It was either then or just after. I don't believe that there was necessarily a project for it, but the goal of it was to see if people, how they react to plutonium in them, from basically to simulate radiation poisoning. Now they did it to, I want to say the number was like 20 to 30 retarded children or disabled children in Massachusetts. They injected a bunch of pregnant women in Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville. And then they also did random selections of people throughout the United States.
And it was without consent.
100%.
Okay.
Another thing is, and Dr. Stephen Greer kind of brought this up, thanks to Brady for the video, is that supposedly the government created fake aliens and UFOs and actual flying saucers to abduct citizens. And everyone describes being on a silver table, experimented on, you know, these things in front of them. To me, it just screams the federal government is doing things to their citizens and doing it under some sci-fi mystery. Here's something else.
Real quick before you continue, because I'm real funny about the language that we use regarding things like this, and Brady kind of knows how I am on this, and it's not that I'm trying to be a nitpicker, but I don't want people to misunderstand. It isn't the federal government, it is segments of the federal government, because even then there were people that were the good guys or whatever. They may not have been aware of it. If they were, then they're just as guilty. But you know, there's a lot of things that our government has done in the name of the federal government that wasn't necessarily, quote unquote, the entire general government. It was segments who did it in secrecy or did it without, you know, approval or whatever. Now, that said, I am not holding up the federal government or the United States as this ultimate good guy either. We've done our share of nasty stuff too, as a system, as a country, as a government as well. So please don't misunderstand me and go the opposite extreme here. I'm kind of somewhere in between, where I recognize that we don't have a system that has always been the ultimate good guy, but often it wasn't because of the federal government in general. It was because of segments of it or certain factions within our government and so on and so forth. I've always believed. I've always believed that there's a war of factions going on in our system since day one.
Yeah. Let me make a correction before
Let
Brady
me,
goes on.
yeah.
Let me narrow it down. So the main people involved in this is the Atomic Energy Commission, which is now known as the Department of Energy.
Okay.
The other people is the military, and then also corporations, i.e. EG&G, which EG&G actually is founded by people who were from MIT. And you know who else was from MIT that was involved in Area 51 as well as the Manhattan Project? Vannevar Bush.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, piggyback on what you guys have both just said, Doug, what I described as part of a government is a rogue element of the government, and they operate without oversight. And this ties into some of the origins we talked about last week of the CIA. And the question that should come up is, well, how do they pay for it? And if I can take us on a quick little rabbit hole, I'll kind of explain how that worked. At the end of World War II, in the war in the Pacific, there was something called Operation Golden Lily. That was a Japanese effort basically to confiscate all the gold and other precious metals of all these countries they've conquered. After the Battle of Midway, it becomes clear that the United States is going to win the Battle of the Pacific. Japan starts, one of the Japanese generals starts hiding all these stashes of gold and precious metals in the Philippines. They'd be digging 100, 150 foot deep holes and then burying the stuff there. When MacArthur gets there to the Philippines and makes good on his promise, I will return. That's why the Filipinos have a great statue for him. I've visited that. It's really cool, actually.
He's a coward.
He wanted to go further, but long story short, one of these, and I'm going to forget the guy's name, but he's one of those connected people to the CIA where I was listing all these guys last week. They discovered, they got a hold of one of the Japanese, the chauffeur of one of the Japanese generals, and they were able to torture him and get the location of a bunch of these stashes of gold in the Philippines. And it was so much, it's about 1.2 trillion back then, dollars worth of gold. MacArthur jumps on a plane, flies all the way back to DC to meet with Truman. And three of Truman's Department of War lieutenants are in the room. There's just the five of them. They create something. One of these guys is Anderson. The second guy is Lovett. And the third guy is not material. They created something called the Anderson Trust. And the Anderson Trust is managing this 1.2 trillion. It's been used to finance black operations and rogue programs ever since. $1.2 trillion back then was something like 30 times the U.S. annual budget, the entire military budget. So this is a lot of money. So that's how that's financed. And I can go into Operation Golden Lily for hours. It's a really fascinating story, but that's where all this money comes from to do stuff that's not on the books. They don't have to rely on congressional
and that gets
approval.
back to what I was saying. You say it was not on the books. The reason why it's not on the books because it wasn't generally accepted by everyone in government or in the country. This is something that there was basically a segment or a faction that was behind.
Yeah,
and
therefore there's no oversight, and that's where you start getting into need to know information. Does the president have the power of declassifying stuff he doesn't know about? It's a fun conversation.
Yeah, we've had that conversation.
Yeah.
Well, so my point for bringing a lot of this up, which can y'all still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
All right.
5 by 5
is. There's a huge turning point in the United States at that time. Oh, let me get my face back. World War II ended. The Atomic Energy Act went into place. Supposedly, something crashed in Roswell. The CIA was even established during this time. We've been experimenting on citizens for years. Probably still continue to do it. I'm kind of wondering, there's something going on that I think no one's seeing, and what better place to hide it than in the Department of Energy? Because here's something else: is that the main point of the act in 1946 was to convert the atomic secrets being a military issue to being moved to civilians. So no longer the military has control of that. Now it's under the control of citizens, of civilians and corporations, which means you lose accountability and you can hide it forever. So
I'm gonna throw you another curveball here. One of the little bits of research I did this week, I was looking into how the Soviets basically got their atomic program up and running, and it's a pretty quick and fun story. But in 1945, Stalin's desperate for an atomic bomb. So if you want to develop an atomic bomb, who are you going to go to? Who are you going to turn to do it? Well, he goes to Lavrentiy Beria, who's the chief of the KGB, the spy chief. He's in charge. He's in charge of all the Soviet purges, sent millions of people to labor camps.
Yeah.
He had an ultimatum from Stalin, and basically build an atomic bomb in 5 years or face the consequences. So they're scientists. They didn't have the material. They didn't have the science or anything like that. So of course they went to their spy network. They're basically what the Americans didn't think they had any chance of building the atomic bomb in 1945. They underestimated what you could do with a command economy, and they underestimated the KGB. So famous British spy by the name of Klaus Fuchs, who had worked at Los Alamos, ardent communist, goes back to Britain. He's working on the atomic project at Harwell, and he's got a handler named Alexander Feklizov. Yeah. And we've got all this testimony. Basically, they were able to steal all of our knowledge, and they were able to build
real quick, let me say this.
Yep.
To add two names to that is Alan May and the Rosenbergs. They were also spies for. Anyway,
Klaus was the guy when it came to the atomic bomb, though. He's the one that got all that information out there. He was a top level German physicist. I mean, this guy's one of the top 3 or 4 guys in the world.
Yeah, I believe he was.
He helped at Los Alamos, and then he went back to Britain, and he was working on a private Britain atomic project when he was funneling all the secrets to the Soviets. And it's funny because they didn't have any abilities to. They were working outdoor in tents while they're building these reactors that turn uranium into plutonium, and they'd be handling this radioactive material. And of course, a lot of these scientists paid the price later on. They discovered radiation the hard way while we were doing the experiments on our own people. Their scientists were experimenting on themselves, and it's a fascinating story, the Soviet atomic story. But it goes hand in hand because of the timing. So while we're founding this Atomic Energy Commission, we're also having someone steal our secrets.
Yeah. Quick question, just because I don't know if I missed this or not. They were turning uranium into plutonium, or
no? Uranium and plutonium are two materials that can be used for basically splitting the atom and creating the reaction you want. So uranium and plutonium are two different metals, basically, or elements, or whatever.
I'm going to go ahead and stick with my original statement. They were turning uranium into plutonium isotopes. That's what they were doing. That's what they were doing. They were using fuel rods to do this. I've got a video to show you on it if you'd like to see it.
They were turning uranium into plutonium isotopes.
How did they do that?
Yeah, they basically had these. They were building a bunch of these, whether steel or lead rods and stuff like that, and they created some kind of reaction. But it's been so long since I took chemistry or physics, I'm not going to be able to go any deeper. I'm just repeating on a pretty well documented video I was watching. So
I would like you.
Anyways,
can you send that to me whenever it's over?
Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
Perfect. Just because that was not any of the research I did, so I'm curious about that. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Tracy's here. I didn't even see her pop in. Hello, Tracy.
Go ahead, Warhamster. You were saying.
No, I was done. I took you. You were going down. You were going into the atomic energies and the act and everything like that. And I went off track. So let's get back on track.
Okay. But yeah. So where was I at? Oh yeah. So. My research is
all right. Real quick, because I did a little research, just real quick. Brady's right. I was wrong. Plutonium is considered a man-made element, although as scientists have found trace amounts of naturally occurring plutonium produced under high unusual geologic circumstances. Typically, uranium has 37 different isotopes. Plutonium being made by man being among them.
Huh.
So I apologize, Brady. You nailed it. So I learned something.
Every once in a while, the student teaches a teacher.
So, so getting back to it, unfortunately, it's so hard. It's to explain to people. It's so hard to find this information that's deeper than what's face value. So what they want you to see face value is we made some bombs. We did a great thing by ending the war. Although a lot of people argue that's actually necessary because dropping napalm was a whole lot more effective. Um, but anyway, um, we're able to make energy with it. We could cure cancer with it. We could purify drinking water with it. It's so fantastic. But yet, when you look behind the curtain, they're doing experiments on people. They're doing all different kinds of things and not being held accountable for it because it's no longer, I don't want to say in the federal government's control. Which, Doug, who would be? Let's back this up a little bit.
Okay.
So if the federal government had control of it during the Manhattan Project and with the military, that would be federal government, right?
Yeah, it would be a part of the federal government. Yes. Once
So
again, I hesitate to throw them all into that same basket of deplorables, but go ahead.
I guess my main question is who does have constitutional authority to have control over something like that? Because the act moved it from the military to civilians, but really, I mean, the federal government, I feel like the states should have had control over that in the beginning anyway.
The federal government's got no authority to do anything to us directly like
What?
that. Domestically, anything domestic's none of their business. And someone say, well, it was in the name of the national security. Well, that's like saying something is in the name of general welfare. Well, if you're going to start playing those games, well, then the federal government can do anything. And it comes down to what is the authority specifically enumerated? They're supposed to handle national security, which is enumerated, which is the common defense and trade, commerce with foreign countries. That's all named in the Constitution.
Right.
To sit here and say, well, gosh, they can jab you for national security or for the common good or for the general welfare. That's not what was intended. If that's the case, if that's how we're going to start reading the Constitution, then we don't have a limited government. We have an unlimited one. And Jefferson said that it's the very thing to Hamilton while Hamilton was arguing in favor of implied powers regarding the Bank of the United States. Hey, if we've got a Congress that has implied powers, and they could do things for the general welfare and the common good, well, then we don't have a limited Congress. We have an unlimited one. Then why do we even have a Constitution?
Right.
Well, yeah, the way it should have been handled, it's very simple. Obviously, the founding fathers could not have foreseen technology, with nuclear weapons and stuff like that, or the need for something along those lines. So if they're going to create something like this because technology has changed, what you do is you create an amendment. You don't just pass it by congressional writ. If there's a need for a new department, you pass an amendment. You tell everyone what you're doing because transparency is pretty big, and then you can do it legally, and you don't have to worry about all these secret black ops stuff.
Yeah. And that was my main question is just nuclear in general, like even like nuclear energy, like is the Department of Energy even legal? Like, is that a state thing? Is it because I get the Department of State, the Department of Defense, but the Department of Energy, that seems domestic. Why is the federal government?
Well, there's no authority for it. So yeah, it's you want to look at it from a strictly constitutional standpoint. It is unconstitutional. So then we ask ourselves this question: should it be a federal authority? And I'm not going to get into the debate whether or not it should be, but the answer is it's not authorized now. If it should be, if we come to that decision, they should have that authority, then let's go through the process. Let's amend the Constitution and say, hey, federal government, now you have the authority over energy. But that was never done. So from a strict constructionist point of view, no, they don't have the authority.
Okay, so this brings up a really interesting question. Elon Musk and others are now basically have taken over the private space exploration, and Elon's satellite system is now basically supporting the Ukraine in a war that the United States isn't even a part of. You know, how is, should he be allowed? Should private citizens be able to do that? And I say, and I'm asking this from the James Bond point of view, supervillain. Do we want private, individuals to have the ability to create private armies? What's to keep Amazon from making an army of drones?
Sure.
Should they be allowed? I mean, these are important questions.
Well, and if we consider the persons that they are assisting, that they're giving aid and comfort to, and then we know the answer, don't we? It's treason.
Yeah, and I think that also goes with my question earlier, as far as nuclear weapons being moved from a military to a civilian thing. I mean, is that even, should something like that be handled by corporations, and there's no accountability for it, and they're doing who knows what with what countries, deals, and all this other stuff? I mean, the Atomic Energy Commission is not the only one either. There's an International Atomic Energy Commission that I believe even that. So
yeah, the International Atomic Energy, whatever, the IEA got in front of my radar back in February of this year, before the Russians invaded Ukraine, and the head of the IAEA basically told the whole world that nuclear plant that the Russians, one of the first things they seized when they invaded Ukraine, he just told us flat out blank that plant had the ability to create enough fissile nuclear material to create like 3 or 4 nuclear weapons. And so that almost justifies the invasion right there, because that's breach of a lot of treaties right there. So that international organization may do some good from time to time, especially trying to keep rogue nations from developing stuff they shouldn't be doing. Should it exist? That's a different question.
Yeah. Oh, Brady, did you ever find out who Lawrence Preston Geist was?
No, I forgot. I forgot you gave me a homework assignment.
That's all right.
I failed.
I don't think you're gonna find it. It's like that. I'm going back to my main point, and this is mentioned to anyone that watches. Please do research and help us figure this one out, because honestly, I think this is the one stone that the government intended for it not to be unturned. That's why Senator McCannon proposed the bill to move all of this from being visible under the military to private citizen. This is another thing that they're using private industry to handle their business, i.e. Facebook with propaganda, i.e. EG&G and other companies to do things that we will never know of, and they could just call their funding from the federal government, for services, because EG&G handled everything for Area 51 for the longest time. They actually have management services, so they could easily get their funding through something that could be overlooked and not realize that they're funding spoon feeding handicapped children plutonium in their oatmeal, which is documented.
So I just pulled Lawrence Preston Geist up on a search engine, and I used Brave Search, which kind of gives you some different results. Grandfather of Jeff Bezos and co-founder of DARPA, who basically financed a lot of these high-tech companies. Going back to private use of private companies doing the government's work. I mean, look at Blackwater. How much we use Blackwater all over Afghanistan and the Middle East. I mean, how legal is that? It's a question. It's something that ought to be discussed.
Yeah, and I think Steve Greer also brought this up. So I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but when it comes to certain things, especially with the Atomic Energy Commission and the government corruption, I think he's got a hand in there that a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave that caveat about Stephen Greer. He's obviously been at this game a long time, trying to expose these things. Some of the stuff he says sounds pretty outlandish, but he's certainly done his homework, and I think he definitely had. There's a lot of truth to what he says. I don't know if it's I don't know whether it's 80% true, 90%, what have you, but he's definitely a source worth listening to, because it makes you think. and the guy's done his homework.
Well, he also, whenever you watch on YouTube, I don't think you see it, or you may, because I oftentimes just listen. But he'll even, hey, here's the document. Let me put it up on the screen so you can see the actual federal document that says this. So, and I believe he also gives document numbers. I mean, granted that could be faked, but I mean, why put it out there for someone to check you on it? You know,
yeah, it's too easy to cross check. Yeah, when someone puts when someone shows you a document, the odds are pretty good that's real.
Yeah. Now, if that's something that the federal government used to throw him and other people off a trail, it's possible. But on Stephen Greer's end, he's not lying, if that makes sense. Same thing with like Bob Lazar. A lot of things he was told, that's what he was told. Is he lying about them? No. Could the federal government be lying to him about it? Of course, if that makes sense. So that's also the issue that we have is here, this is truth. And then it's easy for them to turn around and say, this person's a liar, this is fake, this is not real. Even though, it is true that they presented it, but it turned out to be a lie on the federal government's part, or, whoever. And with the caveat, not a sublet of the federal government. I don't want to make that mistake again. Sorry about that, Doug.
No, no problem.
So if we're back, my question is, if we're back to being a federal republic where the states have reasserted their sovereignty and our federal government is back in its lane of just handling international affairs and interstate disputes, do any of these questions even come up? Are we still able to compete technologically? Or as Andrew kind of alluded to earlier, wouldn't the states, the regulation makes sense in some areas as technology grows. Wouldn't the states get together and form a coalition and have mutually agreed upon, rules and regulations? And because we've seen that work to some degree. And I'll give you a really good example of that. The insurance industry. All 50 states have their own insurance commissioners and their own insurance laws. But they're uniform to a certain degree. So an insurer in California can do business in Arizona and Nevada. Now you apply that to, say, what we call the EPA, environmental regulations and stuff like that. This would be a federalist solution to these national programs, and it's been proven effective in some industries. That's kind of. But how would that apply
to remain constitutional? Though, they're going to have to be careful on how they form that. If it's a cooperation, something where they're working together on for something of that nature, and it's a co-op, then that's fine. But we have to be careful because in Article 1, Section 10, it says that they can't form a treaty, an alliance, or a confederation. Of course, that means, so that they could team up against other states or something like that. But nonetheless, to stay in line with Article 1, Section 10, they'd have to make sure it's like a co-op.
So, and what I'd like to see happen is Congress would basically say, okay, there's a need for this. You states, please get together and figure this out. We'll write a bill, commanding that would be a good use of Congress's time,
right?
And as opposed to, we're just going to create a new government agency, which they shouldn't be doing.
Now, kind of bringing this towards the constitutional aspect of it, everybody keep your tinfoil hats on, but. Is how much with what we have now in the federal government, all the departments, literally everything. What could we, if we got the states to actually do what they are authorized to do, how many departments do you think would disappear from the federal government and become states again and be under the states again, if that makes sense?
Nearly all of them.
Yep. So let's save time, Doug. And why don't you list the ones that would remain?
Well, let's see here. So the ones that would remain off of the top of my head would be the
DoD would be definitely one.
Well, yeah, Department of Defense. It was the War Department originally. You got the State Department. You've got the Department of Justice. Of course, some of the things that the Department of Justice is doing would have to be lost. So in other words, they can't exist, but a lot of what they're doing is beyond their authority, if that makes sense.
So like the FBI, DEA, all them. Yeah.
Department of the Treasury would remain. Interior would be,
the
CIA
would remain.
Yeah, but once again, like the Department of Justice, a bit of its operations would change. Your interior would be gone, agriculture would be gone, commerce would remain, but it would only be allowed to handle foreign commerce.
Okay.
And
let me jump into commerce.
And it would be, of course, engage in disputes between the states. Work with the legislature on that. The Department of Labor would be gone. Department of Health and Human Services would be gone. Department of Housing and Urban Development would be gone. I pulled up the list. That's why I'm able to go through them. Transportation would be gone. Energy would be gone. Education would be gone. Veterans Affairs would remain. Homeland Security by name sounds like it should remain, but what it does, it really shouldn't. So once again, it's one of those departments in which, there may be some finagling to keep the name, but it really isn't what it is.
Tracy said FDA question mark.
I'm sorry?
Tracy
FDA. FDA is long gone.
Oh, FDA is long gone, and that's a agency under one of the departments.
Agriculture.
That's under the agriculture, I think, department.
Well, the fun fact about the FDA, which I love dropping, it was founded in 1913 by the Carnegies and the Rockefellers because they wanted to push their petroleum-based pharmaceuticals, which Rockefeller for Standard Oil had a monopoly on. That's also why they financed all of the medical schools for the next decade or two and changed this over to a totally different medical system. Doug, I want to go back to a question about the Department of Commerce, because one of the earliest constitutional lessons of yours that I attended, you talked about the word regulate. And what the word regulate meant back then was to put in good order, which means you see something wrong going on with interstate commerce, the federal government is obligated to go in there, fix it, figure out what the problem is, and then go away and let things go back to normal. If you have a permanent Department of Commerce monitoring that, that seems like it'd be more than just putting it back in good order. But at the same time, you got to have who's actually keeping an eye on commerce to know when it's time to step in. So it's
it's when a disagreement. It would have to, there would have to be a complaint filed. I mean, it's sort of like going back to what was it? A guy who got like 4 years in the January 6th trial because of what he said when he was going through a window. Well, you can't do that. It's not based on what he said or what he might do. You got to wait until the crime happens. You have to wait until he does it, not what he said. Same thing with here. A commerce department wouldn't be involved until there's a dispute, and the dispute, how do we know about the dispute? Someone complains, someone files that there is a violation. Then, it's just going back. It kind of goes back to my lessons about rights, right? I've got the right to swing my arms. You got the right to sit there. Government's got no business being involved because there's no altercation. But the moment I get close enough to you with my swinging my arms that I become a danger or I strike you and there's a complaint, then government could come in and say, okay, you shouldn't have hit him. Okay, let's deal with this. Right?
Well, all right, let me play devil's advocate on this. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. According to the argument you and I both just made, the government doesn't have any business for ongoing regulation. But I'm here to tell you, if the SEC wasn't doing their job on a daily basis, 95% of, probably more than that, of what they do is good and protects the consumers. You would have more scam artists ripping off consumers on a daily basis. You'd have fake IPOs. It would be the wild, wild west without the SEC.
And then your courts would be loaded with all these complaints, and maybe not, because people wouldn't even realize it. Okay, fine.
They'd realize their bank accounts were drained. So do you create an amendment to create the SEC, or is it a state-run coalition? Or in the case, the security, here's where it gets interesting. Part of my industry is regulated by the SEC, but another big part of it is regulated by what's called FINRA. FINRA is a self-regulatory SRO, self-regulatory organization. All of the big broker dealers and licensed RIAs contribute to this, and it regulates itself. It handles arbitration cases. It makes rules and regulations. So is that the solution as opposed to the SEC? I don't know the answer.
Well, let's do on that for a second. Okay. So, your neighbor is, and I actually have this situation, so I'm going to use it as an example. Your neighbor is making too much noise too late, and your little kitty's got to get up early in the morning. Do we call the Homeland Security Office? Do we call the FBI? Do we call the local police? Do we call the county sheriff? Do we call the state police? Or do we try to work it out among ourselves? And if this is a continual problem throughout our neighborhood, do we not have the neighbors get together and have a community board that meets every once in a while to address these issues? Or do we just call the police every time? I would rather not be calling the police all the time. That's not their job. Their job is not to get involved in our disagreements. Their job is to take care of when something is violated and there is a complaint or there is evidence of it or so forth. These bickerings, these problems that are internal, we should have our own boards. We should have our own committees. We should have our own neighborhood committees, whatever. And so, and that's the way I would prefer. I don't go running to the police every time, someone ticks me off in my neighborhood. I go talk to them. Now, unfortunately, I do have neighbors that do go running to the police every time, and then they tell the police a story that didn't even exist. But it would be best if communities took care of their own business. Okay, now we go back to his industry. I would say, from that point of view, what I just said, it would make sense that the community takes care of its own problems. But if those problems go beyond what that community board or agreement can handle, then you're going to have whatever agency, state, or whatever. Now, if the federal government's going to have any authority over it, because they don't at the moment, then let's amend the Constitution. If we want to keep them out of it, then have the states work with those community boards or whatever they are. So that's my preference, and from a constitutional standpoint, I think that would be the way to go too. From the way the founders kind of did things.
Well, the way the 1933 and 1934 coming right out of the Great Depression, the Wall Street crash of '29, which led into the Great Depression. There was a Securities Act of 1933 and 1934, and they were very effective. These are congressional acts that created the permanent SEC and a rulemaking board. They really reined in Wall Street quite a bit, and there's I have no idea whether or not that actually was one of the inspirations for the business plot that tried to commit the coup against FDR or not by some Wall Street bankers. But
a question for you about that. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Had they done it properly and gotten the authority first, would it have taken too long? Is it too much of a process to get an amendment approved, or do you think that would have been a reasonable way to go?
Well, no, you could have gotten an amendment because it still took them 2 years to get those acts through. They were they were deliberated on quite extensively, and they were really well written acts. They were effective for a good 60 years. They took away a lot of things, but it goes back to do you have a permanent Department of Commerce? Because we got a non-existing entity. All of a sudden, you realize there's a problem. Now you got to get up a team together, research the thing. 6 months later, the damage is still being done. Congress instead said, it makes sense that these Wall Street entities need to be permanently regulated. Does Congress have that authority? It seems to me that as part of the regulation, it almost makes sense that they do.
I would say they don't, but they ought to. And so if they ought to, then we need them to go through the process. Because it's like the kid who says, "Hey, can I borrow the car?" And you always say yeah. So one day he says, he always says yeah anyway. I'll just grab the keys. I don't care if I'm always going to say yeah. You still need to ask. Go through the process. You ask for the permission. That's all I ask. If you should have that authority, federal government, then ask the states for that permission. Do an amendment process. I don't understand why it's so hard. Well, I know why it's so hard, because everybody wants an efficient government, that acts quickly. And Warhamster knows my response to that. There's such thing as an efficient government. It's called a dictatorship. Or as I like to compare, because I'm such a nerd, or the Starship Enterprise, make it so, with Jean-Luc Picard, and it happens. That's efficient, but that's not how our system was set up. Our system was set up to have checks and balances because we know from history that we have a couple of problems here. Number one, in order to even remain a good system, we need to be a virtuous society with virtuous leaders. Secondly, even if you have virtuous society and virtuous leaders, there's still going to be your fair share of human nature mixed into it. So we're also going to need checks and balances, and that includes checks across the board. That includes, but is not limited to, the state legislatures have an oversight over everything. And I've got no problem with that because, hey, if that's what it takes to keep tyranny at bay, I'm willing to take our time and go through the processes. I don't want to be impatient and then wind up in chains. I'd rather be patient and not wind up in chains. That's just me.
You'll be pleasantly pleased if you ever go through the Securities Act of 1933 and 34. The amount of deference that was paid towards states' rights and how they were making things like blue sky laws, et cetera. It actually is it's actually, they're well written laws. I've had to memorize them for quite some time, and they make sense in many ways.
All right, very good.
All right, so that was very left field, but it was still good conversation nonetheless.
Hey man, you're hanging out with Mr. Constitution. It can go anywhere.
Yeah, no kidding.
I always stay in my lane. Of course, I would never go down a rabbit trail.
Yeah, of course not. Not wink, wink, nod, nod.
So here's I'm gonna of course go back to what I was talking about originally, if that's okay with both of you. And here's a question. So supposedly Operation Mockingbird was done in the 60s, correct?
Yeah, mid to late, yeah. 65, 66, does that sound right?
Yeah.
What if I told you that, and I believe it was through Stephen Greer, that may have happened earlier?
Wouldn't be the least bit surprised.
The plans for it, the work, and even activities under the covers without nobody noticing, it would not surprise me at all.
So so what if I told you that War of the Worlds, the broadcast in I believe it was the 40s, what if that was possibly propaganda? Now, the reason why I say that is because I believe it was Stephen Greer, he brought up that the CIA put that on, and who's the gentleman that did it? Was it, I believe his last name was Wells?
H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells, and I'll tell you, well, it's interesting you bring that up because he basically in 1900 wrote a book, was basically talking about the Great Reset. He was a well-known in finance, Hegelian and Malthusianism. He's one of the thought leaders, and he worked very closely with a couple of gentlemen. I'll come back with their names. A lot of sci-fi writers and philosophers were all tied into a lot of this whole population control movement. H.G. Wells was one of the main players. So absolutely everything you're saying checks out. Now
here's the question though: Who's the one that actually did the broadcast on radio? It wasn't the author.
Yeah, no, I know what he means. See, H.G. Wells wrote it, but it was Orson Welles, I believe, that did the radio broadcast.
Yeah.
So supposedly the CIA put him up to it and said, if you don't do this, we're going to kill you and your family. And that was the inspiration for 1947 in Roswell, which was the inspiration for all of this stuff to come forward. I mean, Warhamster, what do you think about that? What do you think about everything I brought up? I know it's kind of jumbled,
well, but no, you're on the right track. Are you familiar with the concept, with the term yellow journalism?
No.
That's a term. It's worth looking into. It was used to describe a fear-mongering type of journalism that was prevalent in the United States, late 19th century, early 20th. And the family that owned all of the newspapers back then was, Doug, help me out here. shoot, it's one of the major families, the Hearst family, William Randolph Hearst, owned many newspapers, and they were famous for doing all kinds of things like, I don't know, reporting on incidences that got us into war. 1898, the Spanish-American War. That was the what's the name of the ship that was sank off Cuba? Turned out that might have been internal sabotage. Well, yeah, our American newspapers definitely beat the war drums for that. You know, and it led
well, because the idea of yellow journalism is to put out as big a headline as you can, even though the story may not be as big as the headline portrays it to be.
Yeah, and they were picking. I mean, they were the media back then was involved in politics and starting wars. Definitely involved in. There's some lethal power struggles between the newspapers and. Oh gosh, who was the millionaire who was McKinley's main sponsor in Ohio? I'll think of his name here in a second. In fact, I got to look that up. It's an important name. That was going on. And remember, the intelligence agencies before we had the CIA and OSS were these corporate law firms like Sullivan and Cromwell. So yeah, what you're saying was Operation Mockingbird or some version of it going on well before that. 100%. The media has always been involved in that stuff.
I guess my main, let me reword the question a little bit, is, and not that question in particular, but when I asked you, what do you think about everything that I've laid out tonight? I mean, everything, the experiments, the manipulation, why aliens, like everything, like why? I guess my question is why? Why?
I can tell you one. I can use it all with one word: Marx.
I'll go bigger picture.
It all comes back to moving us towards a Marxist system. Now, Marx isn't even really the reason. He's just the latest. He's just the latest excuse. Because I mean, we can go all the way back to the Hamiltonians for that matter. But it's all about really that Marx style of thinking. You know, the bigger system, the ruling elite. You know, canceling out liberty, two classes, the privileged class and everyone else who's somewhere near the bottom. You know, I mean, and the founders, they recognize this stuff. And it's funny because you were mentioning newspapers earlier, and a quote came to mind. I couldn't remember it, so I looked it up, you know, just to help you, understand the attitude even towards the news media and the fears of this type of garbage that we experience today. One of the founding fathers said this, and I bet Brady probably can figure out who it is when I'm done reading it. The man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he who knows nothing is nearer to truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods and errors.
That almost sounds like Ben Franklin.
Thomas Jefferson.
That would have been my second guess. No, Doug, when you said one...
Go ahead.
When you said one word... When you said, it goes back to one word, I thought you were going to say power, not Marx. And Marx was a puppet.
Right. Yeah. He's just something along the way. But that's the name that comes to mind.
Well, several shows back, Andrew, you asked me, I went back and told you this big picture about the mercantilists, the Venetians, how these multinational corporations, the British East India Company, have been running governments, not the other way around. That's what this is all about. And they use the media and they use the government for their own benefits. And these people have a Malthusianism, meaning population control. They hate the middle class. They want to have lords and serfs again. They want feudalism no matter what. It's ultimate power. It's Game of Thrones. That's how this all ties together. We're just, you talk about the energy department and stuff like that. That's just one part of that puzzle. But who are the people making these decisions? These are the men in smoke-filled rooms that are making the decisions that affect all of us. They are above the government. They are the shadowy hand that moves markets that nobody dares speak about. And it's been going on for centuries and maybe longer.
It's an age-old battle. It's an age-old battle against the guy behind the curtain.
100%.
And I would not.
A lot of
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's being exposed today like never before.
Sure.
One of the great revolutions in human liberty was the printing press, because all of a sudden people could read for themselves instead of be told what was truth. And now we have the internet, and it's doing the same thing.
Right.
They can't censor us off the internet. We've won the censorship battle to this point, and we're free to have conversations like this tonight, which the government doesn't want us having. They don't want us informing people of all their misdeeds. They don't want us talking about this stuff. It's dangerous to the people that rule the world. And I think that's what I'm going to title my book, Those Who Would Rule You. And this is all that whole story that I've been telling over the last 5-6 weeks. It all ties into that big picture that you're hinting at. So yeah, you talk about, as the government and private enterprises, done some shady things when it comes to nuclear and atomic energy. Of course they have. Why wouldn't they? That's what they do. Doug, what's your quote? Liars lie. Thieves steal.
Pretty much, yeah.
And tyrants act tyrannically. This is what they do.
Liars lie, cheaters cheat, and thieves, steal. I mean, that's what they do. Or it goes back to the story about the scorpion, and with the frogs. The frog says, "Hey, why'd you sting me?" The scorpion says, "That's what I do. I'm a scorpion. I sting."
Tyrants will act tyrannically.
Right.
And like I said, and I get all that, but to me, that still does not answer why. Like the motivation for those particular things.
Because the ends justify the means. Well, everything's off the table. As long as we get what we want, as long as we get our power and we get our money and we get our wealth and we get our control and we stamp out any chance of anybody ever stopping us because of liberty, everything's off the table, or everything's on the table, should I say. We are ready to roll no matter what it is, and we're even willing to commit genocide to make sure it happens.
And Doug, it may end up being that simplistic, that it's just about power, greed, and human nature. But I think what Andrew's asking is, there something bigger involved? Is it a satanic plot?
Oh,
is
sure.
It Illuminati? Are there Freemasons involved? Is this a battle for the soul? The ages. Is this a biblical situation, good versus evil?
It's definitely a spiritual war for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the why. I mean, there's a lot of people that speculate or think they know the answer. Is it the Khazarians? No, I don't think they rule the world. But that's, you can make the argument. I understand where it comes from. That is there. We don't have the answers.
Yeah, and I believe that's the main motivation of it, is obviously Satan trying to cause as much destruction as possible. That goes without being said, but I guess maybe I'm thinking a little too simple about this. But
you're dealing with the armor of God, right? We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this world, the spiritual wickedness in high places, right? Spiritual war. And we know that. So, but it also says, and I want to say it's Ezekiel, that they will have, can't remember what it is over their eyes now, but the blinders, basically. They will not see the folly of what they are doing, and they will even believe it to be moral. Scales over their eyes. That's the term.
From a philosophical standpoint, one of mankind's basic nature is our desire for immortality. And for most of our history, our immortality was one of two ways. It's through God or through creating offspring. We've got these immoral people now that are thinking that, we've got transhumanism. We can plug our brains into computers and all that kind of stuff and live forever. They've got no need. They've been working for a very long time to get to the technology where they can create their own immortality. But it's the essence of nature of mankind is to pass along or to want to survive beyond, our material lives. And that's a big part of the question. I mean, let's say, you're some, head of a multinational corporation. You've accumulated more wealth than 10 generations of your offspring can spend. You got more power. You can do anything you want. You're above the law, but you can't defeat, the laws of nature and time. And that's very frustrating for a person with an ego like that. What do? They've got to find a way to leave their immortal mark some way, shape, or form. And now we've got the technology that these people literally think that they're going to live forever. And it's a very ungodly worldview. Christians will believe, that their immortalities, they already got that covered.
Yeah, man, couldn't they be just satisfied with writing a book? I mean, geez Louise, man.
Well, here's something that was a question that was posed, not to me, but to someone else. And it kind of goes into my question. So someone said, like when you look at a conspiracy theory, how many people are involved? You know, how complex is it to carry out, you know, whatever the theory is? And it's kind of, and maybe that's the direction more I'm asking why. So let me just roll this out, and then, you know, because we could go in the philosophical, the spiritual, and all that, and of course all those aspects are involved in it. But I'm genuinely asking, why in the world would we spend time, money, going through an atomic bomb process that didn't even really need to happen, because we were already obliterating Japan with napalm?
Well, that first of all, we were trying to shorten the war. If we had, I mean, the theory is, and I agree with it, is had we have done a land invasion and you know, it would have cost a lot more lives, not only because of the processes, but because of who we were up against. We were up against an empire and a system of honor that was already teaching their children to continue the war when they become adults. So we needed to, for lack of a better way of saying it, jerk them awake. And,
well, at the same time,
go ahead.
At the same time, the Nazis were well on their way. They were more scientifically advanced than America was. They were well on their way to perfecting the atom bomb, and we had to beat them. We had to beat them to it. So that's why it became a national emergency.
Then let me ask this question. Okay, so we had to create this bomb, even though many generals and others were like, we don't need to do this. What we're doing is very successful. We're hardly losing any lives. We're preventing a land invasion that could cause more lives. We're obliterating Japan with these fire bombs, essentially. There's no need to create a nuclear weapon. Now, moving on.
There is a need, because once again, you want to be first, you want to be ahead, you want to be feared, because that's the way to stop the bad guys, or at least that's what we're told was the prevalent thinking.
Okay, now let's roll this on. A few years later, an act is to take it from military control, move it over to civilian. Now, again, going back, the CIA supposedly, again, speculation, that they wanted to use aliens and invasions as a type of manipulation propaganda. Moving on forward, 1947, the Roswell crash, right? Then the Atomic Energy Act, the CIA comes on board. Now, rolling on, we have Area 51 in 1951. Supposedly, there was some things going on there as far as engineers reverse engineering things, dealing with the pilots of the crafts, as it were, which supposedly was manipulated.
Once again, we have circumstantial evidence. We have some things that may be evidence, but we don't have hard evidence here.
Well, of course, and you know that's one of the things that I think transparency would be very important about, which is why you can't put everything into, like, especially whenever it comes into the interests of the nation and protection of the nation. You know, something like that should not be hidden away in private industry. But anyway, moving on. So we go on throughout the years, you know, all the way up to 2017. We're talking about all this again: nuclear weapons, alien invasions, all this other stuff. That's, I guess, my main question is, for all the time and effort, why go through, like, all the history I just went through? Why?
Because they can.
Well, I want to take you back to, we're talking about the Atomic Energy Commission, right? That founded in 1947, but it was defunded and had to be split up in the early 70s. And the reason it was because of a bunch of green environmentalist groups who were pressuring the government. They hated the nukes. They're worried about, us being born mutants and stuff like that. Well, it turns out the people financing those environmental groups were the KGB. It was a Soviet operation almost from day one, and Kissinger and Brzezinski and all the people that started this whole World Economic Forum in 1970-71 were in on this. So that makes the plot thickens a little bit when you start looking at why did our nuclear program get stalled, and I think it's pretty clear why the Soviets would have had an incentive for us to have less efficient energy. But
yeah, well,
that's a whole show right there.
Yeah, well, I mean, while you were talking, which I was listening, I had a little more time to think about it. Is what is coming for? Because I mean, I believe that especially evil is very patient. People that do evil things are very patient. The Democratic Party, it seems like they plan their stuff out way in advance, and then
they have a hive mind it comes natural to them. But to kind of leapfrog here a little early, I'm not a prognosticator, so I don't make predictions. That said, I can tell you what history says. And someone on a thread today, a text thread that I'm on, says, if we continue down the current path, then what? What happens if we continue down the current path? And I basically said it's very simple. History shows if we continue down the current path that there will be collapse and balkanization. That's what always happens. And when I say balkanization, for those of you who don't know what that means broken up into little pieces, little warring factions, basically. So historically, we know what's in the future based on what we're able to accomplish. If we're not able to accomplish the task of getting this turned around, collapse and balkanization. If we're able to accomplish and start turning things around, what's going to do it? Well, the thing that would do it would be a increase of spiritual faith, a great awakening, if we're going to head in the right direction, or we can head in the wrong direction. We don't necessarily collapse, but we also become basically a tyrannical system. So you have basically three choices. Either we collapse and balkanize, we become a tyranny, or we, through faith, we are able to stave off the bondage and get back towards liberty. And I was talking to a pastor today at an event I was at that kind of ties into this, and it's very interesting. He was there on the date in 2020 in Washington, D.C. that everybody's crazy about. I'm going to try not to say it because I don't want to necessarily get the cancellation thing going. And he says that they were there preaching, and that as people got there and that was going on, most of the people didn't know what to do. They didn't know what was happening. And as a crowd moved towards the building, they moved with it. As it moved away, they moved away. And people are like, what's going on? And he says that part of the problem was that there was a lack of leadership. And what he meant by that was that all of the nationally known pastors that had been preaching, hey, let's be there, let's show where we stand, and so on and so forth, none of them showed up. And the result of that lack of leadership was what happened. The very next day, and he says most people don't know about this, January 7th. January 7th, there was about 300 people at the Lincoln Memorial. And something similar started to happen. Somebody, a gentleman who's actually running for office in LA County, and he and his wife are standing in front of Lincoln Memorial statue. One's got an American flag. The other one's holding up the Gadsden flag. Don't tread on me. And one of the Capitol Police walks up and says, you can't be here, and yanks the flag, the Gadsden flag, out of the woman's hands. The man got upset. And a lot of shouting happened. Suddenly, you've got 300 other people that were patriots that were still there over that time period. Many of them were there the day before at the building we were talking about a moment ago, and they're upset. And now, once again, things are pushing, things are moving. This particular pastor friend of mine and a couple of other pastors, while they're not nationally known, decided they needed to take charge. And they turned to the Capitol Police as the pushing was beginning and the barricades were being put up and all this other stuff. And they said to the police, the Capitol Police, this crowd does not want what looks like might be happening. Give a lawful order, they will follow it. If you believe this could become a riot, say so and ask them to back off. What happened was we had a pastor taking a leadership position in the situation and communicating. And so the police took his advice, and what they did is they addressed the crowd back down, and then someone decided to start singing Amazing Grace. And the whole crowd now is completely no longer angry. They've backed off, and they're singing Amazing Grace. And it's gone from this volatile situation to a situation that is, for the most part, neutralized and, in fact, a friendly crowd. In response, the Capitol Police are like, whoa, you guys are not a bad crowd. We're going to open up the barricades again. And they allowed them access to the Lincoln Memorial. I don't know what happened with that gentleman and his wife and what happened after that, if there was an apology or nothing, but it shows the importance of having spiritual leadership in place. And had that same spiritual leadership or a style leadership been in place the day before at the building in question, would it have been a different situation? And it goes back to something I keep saying all the time. How can we get our political house in order if we don't have our religious house in order? What a difference of situation the 7th of that first month was, as opposed to the 6th of that month.
Well, the CIA hasn't popped in yet, so I'm just kidding. They're probably already here. But anyway.
But no, I think it's very important. So to answer your question, we need if because we're going down the current path and we allow the tyrants to continue what we're doing, we're in trouble. One of two things that happen: we collapse and balkanize, or we are under tyranny. I don't want either. So we have to take a third stance. And I'm not talking what a lot of people keep wanting to say. Oh, well, keep your powder dry. Well, what if you try to do that with what you're up against? I don't know if it'll turn out the way you think. So it's important that we take this other tact, that 7th of the first month tact there at the Lincoln Memorial. We need to make sure that if we do this, if we are to stand firm, it needs to be in a virtuous manner together with spiritual leadership. So what does that mean? Our churches better get involved. Our biggest problem right now in this society is our churches are not involved and they have not taken a leadership position. That's our problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's they're all worried about the 501c3 status.
Well,
that's another conversation for another day. Yeah, it just drives me nuts. I mean, first of all,
for how many pieces of silver are they willing to sell out God's law is usually my response.
Once you repeal the income tax, we don't have to worry about this stuff. Seriously, it solves a lot of problems. It really does. If churches don't, why is the government, basically telling a church what they can or can't talk about? I mean, that's the last thing the government should be doing.
Right.
But hey, we got thrown a major little bonus this week when the CDC got a little bit ahead of their skids and announced that they're going to add the COVID vaccines to the
they just angered the rest of America that wasn't angry with the Democrats is what they did.
Yeah, because the Democrats absolutely own the mandates. I mean, everyone knows that for a fact. And do you guys know why they did it? Do you understand? Is it clear? For the big pharma companies, basically Pfizer and Moderna, to have legal immunity, they have to the vaccines have to be issued under the emergency use authorization, which is Biden was just able to extend that for another 3 months, but that's gone in January. So legal liability comes, or they can be on the CDC's immunization schedule, and that gives them permanent legal liability. Well, the problem with that, as Doug and I have talked about quite a bit, is fraud vitiates everything. And by the way, Doug, someone who's pretty
Throckmorton.
sharp in my circle. I might have been wrong about Throckmorton.
Hmm?
I might have been wrong. Yeah, fraud VDH everything might predate Throckmorton. I've got a pretty sharp legal mind who brought that to my attention last week, so we're going to have to do some
So
homework on that.
Throckmorton is right, but there might be some that predates it.
Yes, there is, and he actually got mad at me for citing Throckmorton as the source. So I'm going to have to, and he's a good enough legal mind that I'm going to defer to his judgment on this. He hasn't been wrong too often.
Okay.
So we need to look at. Anyways, long story short, if Pfizer, and that's the information that came out over the last day or two, is it turns out they had in their clinical trials, Moderna did, that one child got came down with type 1 diabetes like 2 weeks after a 1-year-old got after a vaccination. And am I not allowed to say that word on YouTube? Sorry. If you get canceled, Andrew, it's my fault. My apologies.
That's all right.
And after I spent so much time being careful about the 6th day of the first month.
Long story short, they knew, didn't tell us, still recommended these rumors and to be put into your body, and that constitutes fraud. And if fraud vitiates everything, none of those immunities hold true. And we're seeing this play out in the courts in Europe. Europeans, right. There are many countries that are going after these pharmaceutical companies, and if we get accountability on that, there's a lot more. That's going to open up so many doors. You want to talk about the corporate government conspiracy that we've been talking about basically for the last 5-6 weeks. If you take down big pharma, it opens up a lot of other doors. It's all tied in together: military industrial complex, big pharma, the whole revolving door of government regulation with the corporations, regulatory capture. We start unpeeling that when people can start waking up to it, and it turns out that this is the item that wakes people up. They don't like people experimenting on their kids. So I draw the conclusion that there's still more good in this country than bad, because you see the statistics. Only like 5% of the children under the age of 5 have been fully vaccinated at this point in time. So I'm very optimistic. If we get the quote unquote red wave, not that I think the Republican parties are saviors, but it does stem the tide of some of the worst of the Democratic agenda. And that gives us time to really get things in order. And we start going to the constitutional route, reasserting state sovereignty, getting people who understand the way the government's supposed to work locally. The momentum's building, and that's the way we do it. And it's all about education, waking up. And I 100% agree that it's got to be the spiritual battle is part of this, a huge part of it.
Right.
So I'm optimistic. I am more optimistic today than I was a week ago.
Yeah, and I want to definitely add on to that. One of the things that tyranny always does is number one, it goes too far. They overstep. Number two, once they get to where they think they're supposed to be with their power, they start to eat each other from within. They start to cannibalize themselves, so to speak, because now it becomes a battle for power. Now that they think you're out of the way, now they start going after each other. So we have the overstepping, and we have the battles from within, the battling internal factions, as I like to put it. And I think both of those are starting to happen, and I think they're happening earlier than what is best for the tyrants, and therefore even the normies out there, which is basically the normal people who typically don't pay attention, are being alerted about all of this. And I've got a friend of mine who is retired in the intelligence community, and he says, what exciting times we are in. And when he said it to me, my first response was, what are you talking about? All hell's breaking loose. He's like, no, think about it, man. People are waking up. The news media is not telling you that. They're not going to admit that. The left's not going to admit that, but people are waking up. And not just here in America. Look what happened in Italy. And Italy's a great case in the sense of their new prime minister, who the left is calling a fascist, the first fascist since World War II, to take office. But really, I mean, she would fit right in with our movement, freedom movement here in America. And so it is an exciting time. I do think we are seeing an awakening rather than awoke. We are seeing an awakening of patriots, of Christians, of normal people. And I even think this younger generation is going, you know, I think they're crossing a few lines here. So I'm not one to run pessimistic just yet. And of course, in the words of myself for a very long time, but lately, of a friend of mine who is a prepper, Bill, who says, hey, you know, you hope for the best, you plan for the worst. And that is how you have to operate as a human being.
All right.
Well, that segues into one. You know, I give financial advice for a living. One of the things I've been telling people for a long time, it's you never invest like the world's going to come to an end, because the world only ends once, and when that happens, you're not really going to care about your 401k.
Right.
So we've got to assume that there's a brighter future in front of us. You know, an investment by definition is a financial transaction made today with the expectation that things will be better in the future. It's the exact same. We've got to invest our time and our efforts expecting that things can be better. Just, you know, going off into the woods and hunkering down is not the solution. Getting involved locally, educating yourself and the people around you, that is a solution. And It's kind of fun too. You know, I mean,
being involved in all that. Well, and let's not forget, it's always darkest before the dawn. So it may get tough. It may get really dark. Yeah. But there's a dawn just over the horizon.
So this was a fantastic stream as usual. I'd like us to put a pin in this and continue this in 2 weeks, because y'all are gonna be gone and my birthday's next week. So I think it'd be best for me
so no episode next week.
Yeah.
Happy birthday in advance.
I appreciate that.
Oh, so you finally got to 21, huh?
Actually, I'll be 29.
What's the number?
29. Oh.
Yeah.
Y'all look a day over 28.
Thank you, Tracy.
Just a baby.
Both just said it at the same time. But anyway, let's put a pin in this. We're an hour and 42 minutes in, and we'll pick it up where we left off. And I have some more questions that just kind of popped in that maybe we can jump into, because I possibly see some connections on some things here.
Sure.
But anyway, all right. So 2 weeks.
Give me some advance notice of what's rattling around in that head of yours, so I can do a little bit of homework and have some notes prepared.
Sure.
And and looking forward to it.
And then have them go, what are we talking about?
Well, yeah, you know, Brady knows how I operate. I've kind of always kind of shoot from the hip. Even my radio show on KMET, while I do come up with a list of things I want to talk about, I'm really not looking them up until about 5 minutes before the show. I'm funny that way, but I kind of enjoy that. I think that's one of the things people like about me, is they know that they're getting the genuine, straight out of my brain answer. Yeah. But if I do need to do any research, I'll if you guys think it, so shoot some stuff my way and I'll take a look. But yeah, I tend to be a shoot from the hip kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you look up plutonium? Just kidding.
So
everybody's got to be a you know what. Okay.
I want to make this caveat, everybody. A lot that was said is speculation. We don't have in-hand evidence on it. Some things.
I got like 2% battery left, so I'm getting ready to go bye-bye. So I'm gonna say bye now.
All right, Doug, go ahead and do your sign-off.
United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Go ahead and wrap it up. I'm gonna exit because I'm literally down to 2%. See you later.
All right. See ya.
Good night, Doug.
But anyway, the whole point of me bringing this up is for everybody to have something pop up in their head and for them to start doing their own research, because like I said with my question that I posed, which transformed 7 different ways, which was great, that's always fun to see, is why, with everything that was brought up, why now this something is just does not feel right. And I think there's some stuff there that need to be transparent. And there's so many things that's going on that need to be transparent. But for whatever reason, that's the one thing that's just eating at me that I'm just like, why? It makes no sense to do this stuff any other reason other than control and power and depopulation and all that stuff. But why that way? Why
I
go?
think they're ready.
You know,
I think they thought they were ready. I think they thought the technology was here. They could actually create their immortality. I think the transhumanist view that they finally got to the point where the technology was there. And I do think that people like Stephen Greer are correct that the technological level is above what the public knows. We're probably at least 10 years ahead, or they are 10 years ahead of where we think they are.
Well, he was saying that we even had anti-gravity or gravity control back in the 50s.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, there's no evidence of that. I think
100%.
they definitely. I think the connected people that have taken control of that aspect of our research and development are ahead of what the public gets to see. But how far ahead are
I guess to close this out, that's maybe the homework for everybody, including me, is to fill in those holes and see why even to this day they're now bringing up all this stuff again. The atomic weapons, threat of nuclear, because even Joe Biden I think was talking about it, about something of nuclear war, aliens, and all this other stuff. And then also here's something interesting that they're bringing back up. Back in the early 1900s, the Spanish flu. 100 years later, what exactly came up? Something 19, correct?
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, they did one of the conclusions of the Spanish flu is that masks did not work and actually made it worse, which is interesting.
yeah, well, you're breathing in your own stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the homework for everybody: is fill in all those blanks. Let's see what's truly being said there, and then I think there's a connection from a lot of those experiments, along with, the jab, as it were. I think there's a connection there that is hard to tell. But anyway, for everybody, we're gonna. Oh, do you get something?
Just gonna say, let's wrap it up and have a good weekend.
All right, we're gonna be signing off, and then not this upcoming Friday, but the following Friday, we're gonna have the next episode. So everybody watching or watching later, that is your warning. So if we don't show up next Friday, there's a reason for it. But 2 weeks from today, we will have another show. So anyway, again, this is the Constitutional Roundtable. I'm Andrew, the Citizen, 1776. We have Warhamster right here, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a good night.
Good night.